Listening Section Directions. The listening section of the TOEFL iBT test measures your ability to understand conversations and lectures in English. In an actual test, the listening section is divided into 2 or 3 separately timed parts. In each part, you will listen to 1 conversation and 1 or 2 lectures. You will hear each conversation and lecture only 1 time. After each conversation or lecture, you will answer some questions about it. Answer the questions based on what is stated or implied by the speakers. In an actual test, a clock that is provided shows you how much time remains. The clock does not count down while you are listening. The clock counts down only while you are answering questions. For this practice test, a useful guideline is to spend no more than 35 seconds to answer a question. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. Your notes will not be scored. In some questions, you will see this icon. This means that you will hear but not see part of the question. Some of the questions have special directions. These directions will appear in a gray box on the screen. Most questions are worth 1 point. If a question is worth more than 1 point, it will have special directions that indicate how many points you can receive. You must answer each question. After you answer, select Next. Then select OK to confirm your answer and go on to the next question. After you select OK, you cannot return to the previous questions. You can select Review at any time, and the review screen will show you which questions you have answered correctly or incorrectly, and which you have not answered. From this review screen, you can go directly to any question you have already seen in the listening section. Select Continue to go on.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Mason. Do you have a minute?
Yes, of course, Eric. I think there was something I wanted to talk to you about, too.
Probably my late essay.
Ah, that must have been it. I thought maybe I'd lost it.
No, I'm sorry. Actually, it was my computer that lost it, the first draft of it. And, well, anyway, I finally put it in your mailbox yesterday.
Oh, and I haven't checked the mailbox yet today. Well, I'm glad it's there. I'll read it this weekend.
Well, sorry again. Say, I can send it to you by email, too, if you like.
Great. I'll be interested to see how it all came out.
Right. Now, I just overheard some graduate students talking. Something about a party for Dean Adams?
Retirement party, yes. All students are invited. Wasn't there a notice on the anthropology department's bulletin board?
I don't know, but I wanted to offer to help out with it. You know, whatever you need. Dean Adams, well, I took a few anthropology classes with her, and they were great, inspiring. And well, I just wanted to pitch in.
Oh, that's very thoughtful of you, Eric, but it'll be pretty low-key. Nothing flashy. That's not her style.
So there's nothing?
No, we'll have coffee and cookies. Maybe a cake, but actually a couple of the administrative assistants are working on that. You could ask them, but I think they've got it covered.
Okay.
Actually, oh, no, never mind.
What is it?
Well, it's nothing to do with the party, and I'm sure there are more exciting ways you could spend your time, but we do need some help with something. We're compiling a database of articles the anthropology faculty has published. There's not much glory in it, but we're looking for someone with some knowledge of anthropology who can enter the articles. I hesitate to mention it, but I don't suppose this is something you would...
No, that sounds kind of cool. I'd like to see what they're writing about.
Wonderful. And there are also some unpublished studies. Did you know Dean Adams did a lot of field research in Indonesia? Most of it hasn't been published yet.
No, like what?
Well, she's really versatile. She just spent several months studying social interactions in Indonesia, and she's been influential in ethnology. Oh, and she's also done work in South America that's closer to biology, especially with speciation.
Not to seem uninformed.
Well, how species form. You know, how 2 distinct species form from one, like when populations of the same species are isolated from each other and then develop in 2 different directions and end up as 2 distinct species.
Interesting.
Yes. And while she was there in South America, she collected a lot of linguistic information and songs. Really fascinating.
Well, I hate to see her leave.
Don't worry, she'll still be around. She's got lots of projects that she's still in the middle of.
Why does the man go to see the professor? How did the man learn about Dean Adams's retirement? Why does the professor refuse the man's offer to help with the party? Why does the professor talk about speciation? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
There's not much glory in it, but we're looking for someone with some knowledge of anthropology who can enter the articles. I hesitate to mention it, but I don't suppose this is something you would...
Why does the professor say this?
I hesitate to mention it, but I don't suppose this is something you would...
Below is lots of questions in section. To review a specific question from the list, click on the question. To leave this question, click on exit test at the top of the screen. خمس سوالات ورا.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
So that's how elephants use infrasound. Now let's talk about the other end of the acoustical spectrum. Sound that's too high for humans to hear. Ultrasound. Ultrasound is used by many animals that detect, and some of them send out, very high-frequency sounds. So, what's a good example? Yes, Carol?
Well, bats. Since they're all blind, bats have to use sound for, to keep from flying into things.
That's echolocation. Echolocation is pretty self-explanatory, using echoes, reflected sound waves, to locate things. As Carol said, bats use it for navigation and orientation. And what else? Mike?
Well, finding food is always important. And, I guess, not becoming food for other animals.
Right, on both counts. Avoiding other predators and locating prey, typically insects that fly around at night. Now, before I go on, let me just respond to something Carol was saying. This idea that bats are blind. Actually, there are some species of bats, the ones that don't use echolocation, that do rely on their vision for navigation. But it is true that for many bats, their vision is too weak to count on. Okay, so quick summary of how echolocation works. The bat emits these ultrasonic pulses, very high-pitched sound waves that we can't hear. And then they analyze the echoes, how the waves bounce back. Here, let me finish this diagram I started before class. So the bat sends out these pulses, very focused bursts of sound, and echoes bounce back. You know, I don't think I need to draw on the echoes. Your reading assignment for the next class, it has a diagram that shows this very clearly. So, anyway, as I was saying, by analyzing these echoes, the bat can determine, say, if there's a wall in a cave that it needs to avoid, and how far away it is. Another thing it uses ultrasound to detect is the size and shape of objects. For example, one echo they'd quickly identify is the one they associate with a moth, which is common prey for a bat, particularly a moth beating its wings. However, moths happen to have a major advantage over most other insects. They can detect ultrasound. This means that when a bat approaches, the moth can detect the bat's presence, so it has time to escape to safety. Or else they can just remain motionless, since when they stop beating their wings, they'd be much harder for the bat to distinguish from, a leaf or some other object. Now, we've tended to underestimate just how sophisticated the abilities of animals that use ultrasound are. In fact, we kind of assumed that they were filtering a lot out, the way a sophisticated radar system can ignore echoes from stationary objects on the ground. Radar does this to remove ground clutter, information about hills or buildings that it doesn't need. But bats, we thought they were filtering out this kind of information because they simply couldn't analyze it. But it looks as if we were wrong. Recently, there was this experiment with trees and a specific species of bats, a bat called the lesser spear-nosed bat. Now, a tree should be a huge acoustical challenge for a bat, right? I mean, it's got all kinds of surfaces with different shapes and angles. So, well, the echoes from a tree are going to be a mass of chaotic acoustic reflections, right? Not like the echo from a moth. So we thought for a long time that bats stopped their evaluation at simply, that's a tree. Yet it turns out that bats, or at least this particular species, can not only tell that it's a tree, but can also distinguish between, say, a pine tree and a deciduous tree, like a maple or an oak tree, just by their leaves. And when I say leaves, I mean pine needles, too. Any ideas on how it would know that?
Well, like with the moth, could it be their shape?
You're on the right track. It's actually the echo off all the leaves as a whole that matters. Now, think. A pine tree with all those little densely packed needles, those produce a large number of faint reflections in what's called a smooth echo. The waveform is very even. But an oak, which has fewer but bigger leaves with stronger reflections, produces a jagged waveform, or what we call a rough echo. And these bats can distinguish between the two, and not just with trees, but with any echo that comes in a smooth or rough shape.
What is the lecture mainly about? Why does the professor decide not to add more information to the diagram on the board? According to the professor, what are two ways in which a moth might react when it detects the presence of a bat? What surprising information did a recent experiment reveal about lesser spear-nosed bats? According to the professor, why does a pine tree produce a smooth echo? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Now, before I go on, let me just respond to something Carol was saying. This idea that bats are blind.
Why does the professor say this?
Now, before I go on, let me just respond to something Carol was saying.
What is the lecture mainly about? Why Why does the professor decide not to add more information to the diagram on the board? Listen to a conversation between a student and a registrar.
Hi, I'd like to drop off my graduation form. I understand you need this in order to process my diploma.
Okay, I'll take that. Before you leave, let me check our computer. Looks like you're okay for graduation. And, actually, I'm getting a warning flag on your academic record here.
Really?
Yeah. Let's see what's what. Okay, are you familiar with our graduation requirements?
I think so.
Well, then you know you need 48 credits in your major field to graduate, and at least 24 credits at the intermediate level or higher. Also, after your second year, you have to meet with your department chair to outline a plan for the rest of your time here. In the past, we also issued letters before a student's final year began to let them know what they needed to take in their final year to be okay, but we don't do that anymore.
I definitely met with my chairperson 2 years ago. He told me that I needed 8 more courses at the intermediate level or higher in the last 2 years to be okay. So, I'm not sure what the problem is. I made sure I got those credits.
Unfortunately, the computer's usually pretty reliable. So, I'm not sure what's going on here.
It could be that I've taken 2 basic courses, but coupled both of them with field experiences.
What do you mean?
Well, I could only take intro courses because there were no intermediate level courses available for those particular topics. My chairperson told me that if I did independent field research in addition to the assigned work in each course, they would count as intermediate level courses. My classmates, some of my classmates did this for an easy way to meet their intermediate course requirement. But I did it to get the kind of depth in those topics I was going for. As it turned out, I really enjoyed the fieldwork. It was a nice supplement to just sitting and listening to lectures.
I'm sure that's true, but the computer's still showing them as basic level courses, despite the fieldwork.
I'm not sure what to do, then. I mean, should I cancel my graduation party?
No reason to get worried like that. Just contact your chairperson immediately, okay? Tell him to call me as soon as possible so that we can verify your fieldwork arrangement and certify those credits right away. It's not like there's an actual deadline today or anything, but if more than a few weeks go by, we might have a real problem that would be very difficult to fix in time for you to graduate. In fact, there probably would be nothing we could do.
I'll get on that.
Why does the man go to see the registrar? According to the registrar, what step is currently taken to ensure that students fulfill their graduation requirements? Why does the man mention his classmates? Why does the registrar tell the man to contact his chairperson immediately? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I'm not sure what the problem is. I made sure I got those credits.
Unfortunately, the computer's usually pretty reliable. So, I'm not sure what's going on here.
What does the registrar imply when she says this?
Unfortunately, the computer's usually pretty reliable. So, I'm not sure what's going on here.
Listen to part of a lecture in an animal behavior class.
Okay, well, last time we talked about passive habitat selection, like plants, for example. They don't make active choices about where to grow. They're dispersed by some other agent, like the wind. And if the seeds land in a suitable habitat, they do well and reproduce. With active habitat selection, an organism is able to physically select where to live and breed. And because an animal's breeding habitat is so important, we'd expect animal species to have developed preferences for particular types of habitats, places where their offspring have the best chance of survival. So let's look at the effect these preferences can have by looking at some examples. But first, let's recap. What do we mean by habitat? Frank?
Well, it's basically the place or environment where an organism normally lives and grows.
Right. And as we've discussed, there's some key elements that a habitat must contain. Food, obviously. Water. And it's got to have the right climate. And spaces for physical protection. And we saw how important habitat selection is when we looked at habitats where some of these factors are removed, perhaps through habitat destruction. I just read about a shorebird, the plover. The plover lives by the ocean and feeds on small shellfish, insects, and plants. It blends in with the sand, so it's well camouflaged from predator birds above. But it lays its eggs in shallow depressions in the sand with very little protection around them. So if there are people or dogs on the beach, the eggs and fledglings in the nests are really vulnerable. Out in California, where there's been a lot of human development by the ocean, the plovers are now a threatened species. So conservationists tried to create a new habitat for them. They made artificial beaches and sandbars in areas inaccessible to people and dogs. And the plover population is up quite a bit in those places. Okay, that's an instance where a habitat is made less suitable. But now, what about cases where an animal exhibits a clear choice between two suitable habitats? In cases like that, does the preference matter? Well, let's look at the blue warbler. The blue warbler is a songbird that lives in North America. They clearly prefer hardwood forests with dense shrubs, bushes, underneath the trees. They actually nest in the shrubs, not the trees, so they're pretty close to the ground, but these warblers also nest in forests that have low shrub density. It's usually the younger warblers that nest in these areas because the preferred spots where there are a lot of shrubs are taken by the older, more dominant birds. And the choice of habitat seems to affect reproductive success, because the older, more experienced birds who nest in the high-density shrub areas have significantly more offspring than those in low-density areas, which suggests that the choice of where to nest does have an impact on the number of chicks they have. But a preferred environment doesn't always seem to correlate with greater reproductive success. For example, in Europe, studies have been done of black-cap warblers. We just call them blackcaps. The blackcap can be found in two different environments. Their preferred habitat is forests near the edges of streams. However, blackcaps also live in pine woods away from water. Studies have been done on the reproductive success rates for the birds in both areas, and the results showed, surprisingly, that the reproductive success was essentially the same in both areas, the preferred and the second-choice habitat. Well, why? It turned out that there were actually 4 times as many bird pairs or couples living in the stream edge habitat compared to the area away from the stream. So the stream edge area had a much denser population, which meant more members of the same species competing for resources, wanting to feed on the same things or build their nests in the same places, which lowered the suitability of the prime habitat even though it's their preferred habitat. So the results of the study suggest that when the number of competitors in the prime habitat reaches a certain point, the second-ranked habitat becomes just as successful as the prime habitat, just because there are fewer members of the same species living there. So it looks like competition for resources is another important factor in determining if a particular habitat is suitable.
What is the main purpose of the lecture?